The Vancouver Canucks season came to a disappointing end last week, but now a pivotal offseason awaits. Trevor Beggs of Locked On Canucks joins us to discuss what went wrong in Game 7, plus what is ahead for this team this offseason. All that coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here. Welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Canucks, Trevor Beggs. And Trevor, sorry things didn't work out in Game 7, but overall, a great season for the Canucks. But what happened in the playoff series that they ended up falling just short?
Yeah, I think the Vancouver Canucks ended up getting their just desserts, right? I mean, by the end of the series, by the end of 7 games, they were not the better team. Now, there was still a path for them to win, and, maybe I'm a bit biased, but I'm thinking, if they get 10 shots on goal more in Game 7, they probably bury an extra 1 or 2 on Skinner and maybe win that series. But, Artur Shilov's, as great as he was, he just wasn't Thatcher Demko. It was a close series, right? 6 of 7 games decided by 1 goal. So, at the end of the day, kind of like you alluded to, it was a fantastic season for the Vancouver Canucks. Most prognosticators had picked them to miss the playoffs. Never mind win the division, never mind win a round. That most people picked them to miss the playoffs heading into the season. And, Jim Rutherford had that famous quote that, if everything goes right, we're a playoff team. And, almost everything did go right for Vancouver, and they were one of the best teams in the NHL this season.
How big a loss was Thatcher Demko for this team? And do you think they win the series if he's 100% healthy for this series against Edmonton?
Yeah, I do. You can call me biased. I don't really care. I think they win with Thatcher Demko and net. And, again, for those who watch the games, Artur Shilov's was fantastic. I mean, you look at his numbers in the series against Edmonton, he had an .898 save percentage. So it's nothing that really screams elite goaltender. But man, oh man, Artur Shilov's was so clutch. Made so many amazing saves in that series. And, he gets the shutout too to get the win in round 1 over Nashville as well. So Artur Shilov's was so good for the Vancouver Canucks. Again, not even 20 games of NHL experience after this playoff run, 10 of them coming in this postseason. So goaltending is so weird because he was a guy I watched in the AHL this season. And I'm thinking like, man, is this guy ready? He had some shaky games down there. It didn't look fantastic. And he was so good for the Canucks in the playoffs. But yeah, to answer your question, again, I think if Demko's in there, I think he makes a couple extra saves. I think the Canucks probably move on.
Well, we will never know, but I don't think that's an unreasonable position. Rick Tocchet wins the Jack Adams Award as the NHL's Coach of the Year. Tell me why he deserved it and, what he did this year to help this team reach their potential.
Yeah, and starts with structure, which gets tossed around a lot, right? He really did bring a structure in place. And look, Canuck fans know this has been a team that hasn't played good defense for the better part of 10 years now, right? That's a long time where this team has just been atrocious defensively. And, it was the same under Green, it was the same under Boudreau. Going back to even Willie Desjardins, the defense kind of sunk us in the playoffs back then. So, he really brought a good structure in place. And I think one of the most incredible things about the Canucks turnaround here, Gil, is, in this market, we're looking at the other 2 Jack Adams winners, right? Pat Quinn won Coach of the Year back in 91-92. Alain Vigneault won in 06-07. For Pat Quinn's year, that was the year Pavel Bure broke into the league. So that helps the coach out. When Alain Vigneault won, that was Roberto Luongo's first year with the Canucks, where he was, should have won the Vezina. He was up there in the Hart voting. Rick Tocchet didn't have any major additions. So to me, that's one of the craziest things about this turnaround is that the Canucks, they bought out OEL and they added some pieces, but they did not have a Pavel Bure or a Roberto Luongo coming in here to elevate this team. Like, this was all Rick Tocchet and his staff coaching this team up. Again, getting them to play for each other, getting them to play good defense. I think they brought the most of the Quinn Hughes. They really brought the most of everyone in that defense core. I think Rick Tocchet was great for JT Miller. Man, oh man, that guy goes from second line left winger 5 years ago to 100-point bona fide number one center, going against the opposition's best players every night. He brought the most out of his players. And, for the turnaround this team had compared to, what they did in the offseason, again, adding secondary pieces, but not much else. The job he did was just absolutely incredible. And again, deserving to win Coach of the Year. And I think probably the most deserving Jack Adams winner in Canucks history among the three candidates.
This offseason, lots going on. When we were talking before we started to record, you talked about the rumor mill heating up. Talk to me about, what the Canucks are trying to prevent from happening and what they're trying to make happen during this upcoming offseason.
Yeah, it's a good way to phrase that question. I mean, I think they're trying to prevent, these big onerous contracts for guys that don't deserve them, right? And that's why, Kyle and I even made the argument this week that we wouldn't be shocked if Lindholm might be their top priority. Now, I don't think they're going to be able to afford to keep him, to be honest with you. But I think this management team is going to target star power over depth. And that makes me wonder about guys like Dakota Joshua, Nikita Zadorov, these big physical presences who, you'd love to have them back. They were so good in the playoffs. But are those the guys you want to be handing out these big long-term deals to when they're kind of secondary pieces to your team, right? I think the Canucks they desperately want another top six winger. Jake Gensel, I wouldn't be shocked if they try to trade for him at the deadline. I wouldn't be shocked if they would target him in free agency. The rumors about Martin Necas right now are interesting, right? And I know people are tying those together because he was rumored to be part of that Pettersson deal that they used to get him to sign. But you can kind of see a world where the Canucks maybe trade Hronek for Martin Necas. I mean, that could make sense for both teams. That being said, I think Hronek's getting a lot of heat in this market for a subpar second half, for not a great playoffs, for being a little bit testy at his end of season press conference. But the Canucks just haven't had a right shot defenseman like him in a long time. And, Kyle and I were saying in the first half of the year, this might be the second best defenseman in Canucks history, Phil Hronek. But again, tailed off in the second half, so maybe not so much. But yeah, a lot of interesting contracts here. And I know Hronek's an RFA, so it's a bit different, but it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge to reshape and restructure this team and keep them as competitive as they were, because a lot did go right this season. And I think the biggest thing the Canucks have to balance out here is how much money they allocate to forwards versus defense, right? If you go after a Jake Gensel, if you sign an Elias Lindholm, you're probably going to come back with a weaker defense, on paper at least. But if you go for maybe like a Tyler Toffoli type or some of the lesser names out there, I know they want a top six winger, but maybe they don't go big game hunting. Then it probably allows you to ice a defense that's as good, if not better, than last year. So that's, I think, the big balancing act that Canucks got to strike this offseason.
And how does the cap situation fit into all of this? How much cap space do they have right now?
Yeah, so the Canucks have about $26 million of cap space right now heading into the offseason. And we have people on our show being like, oh, they have $26 million. Why can't they sign Zadorov and Joshua and Lindholm and Hronek? And it's like, you could probably sign three of those guys with that money, but you're not signing all four, right? So for people who are like, oh, we got to keep Zadorov and Joshua and Lindholm, it's like, okay, well, then Hronek's going. So, the Canucks have, I think, 13 roster players. They got to, fill out 10 spots on their roster with $26 million. So it's not an easy task. I do wonder about Ilya Mikheyev. I don't know about the buyout avenue necessarily. Patrick Allvin was pretty complimentary of his work ethic at the end of season presser. But yeah, that's a guy making almost $5 million who's, they're looking for a top six winger because Ilya Mikheyev is getting paid like that, but he's not that guy. And yeah, I just wonder if this team has appetite for another bite after OEL. I'm leaning towards no. Maybe they can swing a deal where they trade him, like they did with Anthony Beauvillier. Got to swing for a 6th-round pick, 7th-round pick. Get that off your books. That would allow them to do a bit more this offseason as well. So, interesting times in Vancouver, as always, and curious to see what they do, to be honest. I think there's a lot of guys they love to keep, and they're not going to be able to keep all of them, and they also want to add a top six winger on top of that. So, fascinating stuff as always. But hey, Patrick Allvin, Jim Gregory nominee, one of the GMs of the year. I'm curious to see what he's got up his sleeve this offseason.
Well, we shall see, and I know you'll have it covered, you and your co-host, every step of the way. Trevor, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Trev Beggs. I got Instagram as well. I'm not much of a social media guy, but there's Trev Beggsy on Instagram. And then you can find the show Locked On Canucks wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. And that's where we're at, man. Come listen in. Always a fun time in Vancouver.
No doubt about that. Trevor, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Hockey fans, use your knowledge of the NHL on FanDuel. You can check out all the odds on who's going to win any one game in the playoffs. Maybe you want to bet on which team wins the Eastern or Western Conference Final, or which team is going to win the Stanley Cup, or how about betting on the Conn Smythe Trophy as the playoff MVP? You can check out all the latest odds at FanDuel. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.